St. Michael's emergency department breathes with the rhythm of controlled chaos at 2,200 hours. Fluorescent lights hum overhead like insects trapped in glass, casting everything in pale clinical white. The smell of antiseptic cuts through the copper tang of blood and the sharp exhale of diesel fuel from the ambulance bay. Ashley Cooper moves through the noise with the economical precision of someone who has learned that wasted motion costs lives. Bay 4 erupts with sound. An MVA patient screaming, his right leg bent at angles that make residents wince. The two young doctors fumble with ultrasound equipment, their hands trembling slightly, their voices climbing octaves they didn't know they had. Ashley's footsteps don't change rhythm. She pulls the crash cart closer with a single efficient movement. Her scrubs are navy blue, unremarkable, worn soft at the edges from 1,000 shifts. The scar tissue across her knuckles is faint but visible under the harsh lighting, white lines that spell out a language only combat doctors recognize. A 14-gauge angiocath needle sits in her hand. She doesn't announce herself. She doesn't ask permission. She simply appears beside the patient's thrashing arm, her voice dropping to a register that cuts through the screaming like a blade through water. Look at me. Not them. Me. The patient's eyes snap to hers. Something in her face, something ancient and certain, makes the panic recede by half. Her tourniquet goes on with practiced efficiency. Palpate. Find. Enter. The needle slides home. Blood flashback in the chamber. She withdraws the needle with one fluid motion, threads the 4-line, and secures it with tape while the residents are still staring at where she was 2 seconds ago. O2 SATS rising, one of them whispers. Ashley doesn't hear them. She's already moving. Dr. Marcus Pierce watches from the nurse's station, his fountain pen tapping against a chart in a rhythm like a countdown. He's been at St. Michael's for 3 weeks. Johns Hopkins before that. Mayo Clinic before that. Everywhere he's worked, he's carried the same expression, the one he's wearing now while watching the nurse with scarred hands move through his emergency department like she owns it. His jaw tightens. His eyes narrow to surgical precision. He sets the pen down with deliberate care. The morning rounds begin at 0700. 12 attending physicians and 4 residents circulate through the trauma bays in a practiced formation, stopping at each bed to discuss cases with the detached efficiency of people who've learned to store their emotions in lockers. Dr. Pierce moves with them, his white coat pristine, his tie perfectly knotted, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from inherited confidence and Ivy League letters. They pause at the nursing station. He leans against the desk, casual, friendly. One of the senior attendings, Dr. Holloway, a woman with 30 years of experience and the kind of reputation that precedes her in 2 rooms, stands beside him reviewing a chart. The nurse in Bay 4, Pierce says quietly. No names yet. Just the setup. Did you notice her for technique last night? Holloway doesn't look up from the chart. Solid. Clean access. Patient stable. Technically solid, Pierce says. The words land like small stones in still water. But did you see how she didn't wait for protocol? Didn't ask. Just moved in like she was running the show. That's cowboy mentality. He smiles. It's the kind of smile that makes people uncomfortable without knowing why. I've seen that before. Field medicine mindset. Works fine until someone gets hurt and suddenly we're liable. Holloway frowns slightly. Her pen hovers over the chart. She's heard this tone before from other doctors in other hospitals. It plants seeds. That's what Pierce has learned. You don't attack directly. You just suggest. You just mention. You let other people draw the conclusions. By the time they realize they're being poisoned, they've already drunk the whole glass. I'm sure she's fine, Holloway says. But there's doubt in her voice now. Tiny. Barely audible. But it's there. Room 12 is quiet except for the soft mechanical wheeze of the ventilator. Captain Marcus Webb lies motionless on the hospital bed, the closed head injury from a training accident leaving him intubated, dependent, unconscious. Machines surround him like mechanical priests at a bedside vigil. His right forearm rests above the blanket, visible and unavoidable. The tattoo is in block letters, the kind of lettering that takes time and hurts. Ashley Cooper, Kandahar 2019. Underneath the name, faded now but unmistakable, the date of an operation that no longer exists in classified records. Ashley stands beside the ventilator, checking settings with the focus of someone reading scripture. 16 breaths per minute. FiO2 at 40%. PEEP at 5. She adjusts the inspiratory flow rate with a single finger, and the machine whispers into a slightly different rhythm. Her face is professionally blank, the kind of blank that requires extraordinary discipline to maintain. Webb can't see her. Hasn't seen her in 4 years. Won't remember her at all if his brain damage is as complete as the scans suggest. But she sees him. She sees the name on his arm. She sees the dates that mark the worst 72 hours of both their lives. Dr. Pierce enters the room at 1100 with Webb's family trailing behind him like ducklings. He's brought his audience. The mother stands in the corner, wringing her hands. The sister clutches a rosary. The teenage niece stares at her uncle with the particular devastation of someone watching a giant be brought low by nothing more dramatic than gravity and asphalt. Pierce moves to the head of the bed with the confidence of someone who assumes everyone in the room exists to validate his opinions. Captain Webb is stable, he announces, addressing the family, ignoring Ashley entirely. Though I have to say, I'm concerned about some of the nursing decisions regarding his ventilator settings. He turns now, his eyes landing on Ashley like accusations. 14 breaths? That's aggressive. Unconventional. Some might say reckless. Ashley's hands don't stop moving. She finishes documenting on the chart, her handwriting precise, military clean. She doesn't look at Pierce. Doesn't acknowledge him. Simply exists in the room with the same calm as a stone exists in a river, present, unmoved, immovable. Those settings are standard for closed head injury management, she says quietly. Prevents hypoxia, manages intracranial pressure. Standard, Pierce says to the family, as if the word is pity. Or optimal. There's a difference, you know. Some nurses follow protocols. Others understand medicine at a level that goes beyond protocol. He turns back to Ashley. The question is, which are you? The room goes so quiet that the ventilator's wheeze becomes overwhelming. The mother stops wringing her hands. The sister's rosary beads click once, then freeze. Ashley's jaw tightens, just a fraction. A muscle flickering. But it's there. Restraint. Not fear. Never fear. But the kind of restraint that comes from somewhere deep and military and hard-earned. Your son's O2 levels are 96%, Ashley says. Her voice hasn't changed. Intracranial pressure stable. Pupils reactive. His settings are correct. Pierce smiles at the family as if she hasn't spoken. As if she's already irrelevant. I'll make a note in his file that we're transitioning to my recommended parameters. We need the best care here, not just standard care. He leaves the room. The family follows, the mother giving Ashley one glance, grateful and apologetic at once. Guilty for believing the doctor, ashamed that they're already beginning to doubt the nurse. Ashley doesn't move for a full 30 seconds. Then she opens the supply closet, a narrow space between room 12 and room 13, barely wide enough for shelves and a single person. She steps inside and closes the door. The darkness is almost complete except for the sliver of light at the bottom. Her hand moves to her chest, to the inner lining of her scrub jacket. The fabric is worn soft from years of contact, worn so thin in one spot that you can almost see through it. She finds the patch, faded now, the colors drained by time and humidity and the heat of her own body. The 75th Ranger Regiment insignia. She presses her palm against it, feeling the stitching beneath her skin, the reminder of who she is when the scrubs come off. The patch is supposed to be invisible. Hidden. A private talisman from a life she doesn't have anymore. Except the patient in room 12 is Captain Marcus Webb, and Captain Marcus Webb's forearm bears her name in permanent ink underneath dates that classified records pretend don't exist. She's been assigned to St. Michael's for 18 months. 18 months of watching, waiting, protecting. 18 months of being called just a nurse while holding the rank of captain in a uniform that stays locked in a storage facility across town. 18 months of pretending that the man with her name tattooed on his arm is just another intubated patient. The break room is where the poison spreads fastest. It's 1,500 hours when Ashley pushes through the doors, and the room is occupied by 4 nurses and 2 respiratory therapists, all of them frozen mid-conversation like actors who suddenly remembered they were being watched. The silence is immediate. Complete. Like someone has reached into the room and turned off the sound. One of the nurses, Jennifer, who's worked alongside Ashley for 8 months without incident, suddenly remembers she has vitals to check. She leaves. Then the respiratory therapist remembers charting. Then another nurse sees something urgent in her phone. In less than 15 seconds, the break room empties, and Ashley stands alone in front of a refrigerator full of forgotten lunch containers and a coffee maker that's been cooling for hours. She pours coffee anyway. Black. No sugar. She sits in the silence and drinks it, and her hands don't shake, and her face doesn't betray anything, and in the invisible places where no one can see, she touches the patch again and remembers what it means to be seen. The write-up appeared on the unit board at 0847 like a formal declaration of war. 17 protocol deviations. 17. The document was pristine, Dr. Pierce's handwriting precise as a laser, each infraction dated and timestamped with a meticulous detail of someone building a case rather than addressing a mistake. Charting delay 2,340 hours to 0015 hours. Supply cart restocking incomplete 1,430 hours. Break duration exceeded standard by 4 minutes 1,215 hours. The paper was white. The font was black. The message was unmistakable. Ashley read it once while standing at the board, her posture unchanged, her eyes tracking each line. Respiratory therapy tech Marcus passed behind her and pretended to study the staffing matrix. The unit coordinator suddenly needed something from the back office. By 0900, everyone had seen it. By 1000, conversation stopped when she entered a room. By 1100, she was a cautionary tale being whispered about in the break room, a nurse who didn't understand her place, who needed reminding that protocols existed for reasons, who thought she could practice medicine without the education to back it up. The beauty of Pierce's strategy was its surgical precision. Every infraction was real. None were significant. Charting could legitimately occur in a narrow window. Break times varied by unit demands. Supply restocking was collaborative, not individual. But listed sequentially, dated and documented with photographic evidence clipped to the back of the form, they constructed a narrative of carelessness. Of someone operating outside the system. Of someone who thought rules didn't apply. Ashley folded her hands and continued her shift. At 0145, her pager vibrated. Room 12. Captain Marcus Webb. The message was terse, "Sister here." Says breathing changed. "Come now." She moved without hurrying, without the practice speed that would signal alarm. The cardiovascular unit at St. Michael's was laid out in a careful grid, for corridors, 28 patient rooms, monitoring stations positioned to see without always being seen. Webb's room was at the end of the east corridor, isolated enough that visiting family could have privacy, exposed enough that nurses could respond quickly when things went wrong. The door was ajar. Soft voices inside. The sound of a monitor beeping its steady rhythm, 84, 85, 86. Webb's sister stood at the window. Early 30s, dark hair pulled back, eyes that had learned to read suffering through watching it happen to people she loved. Their mother sat in the corner chair, sleeping with her head tilted at an angle that would hurt later. Their father was somewhere else, probably the waiting room with bad coffee and worse options. His breathing changed about 10 minutes ago, Webb's sister said. Not faster. Different. And the tube, she pointed to Webb's right chest, where the drainage tube emerged from beneath the dressing. The fluid almost stopped. Before it was draining steadily. Now it's just clear, like nothing's moving. Ashley's eyes went to the monitor first. 82. 83. 84. The oxygen saturation was drifting, a slow descent that hadn't triggered alarms yet because the alarm threshold was set at 80, and St. Michael's didn't like preventive alerts. They preferred to respond after the patient was already in crisis. She moved to Webb's bedside and pressed her palm against his chest wall, feeling the subtle asymmetry, the right side moving less air than the left. The chest tube had been placed 72 hours ago during the initial trauma surgery, a standard procedure for the hemothorax that had come with his injuries. Standard meant routine. Routine meant it should be working. It wasn't working. His oxygen is dropping, Ashley said quietly. The tube appears to be partially dislodged or occluded. I'm going to page surgery. She moved to the wall phone and dialed the operator with the efficiency of someone who had performed this action hundreds of times. Code page for the on-call surgical resident. Stat room 12, East Corridor. Possible chest tube complication. The reply came within 60 seconds. Dr. Mahmood answered his page before the second ring, his voice thick with sleep but clearing fast as Ashley explained what she was seeing. Saturation dropping incrementally. Drainage cessation. Breath sounds diminished on the right. He said he'd be there in 3 minutes. He arrived in 5, already moving toward Webb's bedside with the confidence of someone who had examined thousands of patients in the dark hours of early morning. Mahmood was good, a third-year resident with hands that moved deliberately and eyes that didn't miss details. He listened to Webb's lungs, checked the tube connections, and nodded once, a small gesture that contained a complete assessment. It's dislodged, he said. The tube pulled partially out of the pleural space. We need to replace it or reposition it immediately. I'm calling the attending. He reached for the phone, and that's when the door opened and Dr. Pierce appeared in the doorway as if he'd been waiting for this moment. As if he'd somehow known a crisis was developing in room 12 at precisely 0147 on a Tuesday morning. He held his tablet like a weapon, and he smiled like a predator recognizing wounded prey. Before we proceed, Pierce said, I need to formally document the nursing assessment that led to this situation. Policy for 47B requires review of all invasive procedures, especially when initiated by nursing staff. Dr. Mahmood turned, confusion crossing his face. The tube was placed 3 days ago by surgery. During the initial trauma stabilization. But the current crisis emerged under nursing observation, Pierce continued, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from years of assuming he would never be questioned. We need to ensure proper scope of practice. We need to document that the nursing staff identified the problem correctly and that physician oversight is being maintained throughout the treatment course. His fingers moved across the tablet screen, swift and purposeful. I'm opening an incident report. Just a precaution. Mahmood's jaw tightened. Dr. Pierce, the patient is decompensating. We need to focus on stabilization. I understand, Pierce said. I'm simply ensuring we follow policy. On the monitor, the numbers dropped. 82. 81. 80. Ashley stood perfectly still. Her hands were at her sides. Her face was neutral as a painting. Inside her mind, the 75th Ranger Regiment patch sewn into her jacket lining felt warm against her ribs, and she thought about what it meant to watch someone decide between policy and life. She thought about watching people choose, moment after moment, between the thing that mattered and the thing that covered them. She stepped forward quietly. The O2 sat is at 80. The patient is approaching critical. We need to proceed with tube replacement now. Pierce looked up from his tablet. His expression shifted through several phases, surprise that she had spoken, annoyance that she had dared, and then a kind of triumph, as if she had just walked directly into a trap he'd been setting since the moment she arrived at St. Michael's. Is Cowboy giving medical orders now? He said. The words hung in the room like a blade. Webb's sister made a sound, not quite a protest, not quite an acknowledgement. Mahmoud's face flushed. The monitor beeped its steady count, 79, 78, 77. The patient needs immediate intervention, Ashley said. Her voice was different now, lower, steadier, carrying the kind of calm that comes from having already made peace with the consequences of speaking truth. I'm not giving orders. I'm reporting vital sign changes and requesting surgical evaluation. Dr. Mahmoud has already assessed the patient and determined intervention is necessary. Pierce's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and made a small disappointed sound. That's the ICU, he said to Mahmoud. Trauma admission. 2 cars, multiple crush injuries. The attending surgeon is asking for you specifically. Says they need a resident over there now. Mahmoud looked between Pierce and Webb's monitor. Between the crisis in room 12 and the crisis somewhere else. Between the patient he could see and the patients he couldn't abandon. The choice was impossible and inevitable. I'll call the attending to come here, Mahmoud said finally. He can handle the repositioning. Just keep monitoring. He left. The door closed behind him like a punctuation mark. Pierce remained in the doorway, his tablet still in his hands, his expression suggesting that everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Ashley turned back to Webb's bedside and continued monitoring his oxygen saturation, her hand steady around the blood pressure cuff, her voice measured as she spoke to Webb's sister about what would happen next. The monitor showed 76. Behind her, she could feel Pierce's satisfaction like heat. She could feel the weight of his documentation, the institutional power he was building with every note, every report, every small strategic choice that positioned him on the side of protocol and regulation while she was positioned on the side of impulse and deviation. The patch in her jacket lining had been there for 18 months. It represented a different uniform, a different chain of command, a different life where this man would have lasted approximately 4 seconds before being permanently reassigned to a desk in Fayetteville. But that world was sealed off from her now. In this world, at St. Michael's in San Antonio, he held the cards. The clock showed 0147. Webb's oxygen saturation continued its descent toward the point where alarms would force action, where the system would finally care enough to intervene because numbers had reached the threshold where death became officially possible. Ashley paged the attending surgeon again. This time, his response was immediate but his voice was strained. I'm with the trauma admission. Mahmoud said you had the situation? What's the status? 76% and falling, Ashley said. Partially dislodged chest tube. The resident evaluated and determined replacement was necessary, but he was called to your location. I'll be there in 5 minutes, the attending said. Keep me updated. She hung up the phone and turned back to Webb, whose sister was now holding his hand, whose mother had woken in the corner chair and was pretending not to be afraid. The monitor showed 74. The numbers kept dropping like a countdown to something terrible, like a clock measuring the distance between now and the moment when a young Army Ranger's body simply stopped cooperating with the demands being made of it. 74%. The number glowed red on the monitor, a warning that Webb's body was running out of time. Ashley's hand moved to the oxygen dial, cranking it to 100%, her movements precise and economical. The ventilator hissed its mechanical rhythm, forcing air into his lungs with increasing desperation, but the numbers refused to climb. 73. The machine beeped once, twice, 3 times, each sound a small indictment of the system failing around them. She reached for the phone at 0237 and paged surgery again. Not a request. A fact stated into the void, Captain Marcus Webb, room 12, emergent reassessment required. Her voice carried the kind of calm that comes from having already survived worse. The attending would come. The attending always came when the numbers moved like this. Within 9 minutes, they arrived. The on-call resident first, a younger man named Castellano who glanced at the monitor and immediately understood the geometry of the problem. His jaw tightened. He reached for Webb's chart, scanning the ventilator settings, the most recent blood gases, the X-ray showing the chest tube dislodging from its proper position like a ship slipping its moorings. Castellano nodded at Ashley. Good catch. We need to. The door opened. Dr. Pierce filled the frame without raising his voice. He didn't need to. He carried his authority the way other men carried weapons. Dr. Castellano. Before we proceed, I need to make you aware of serious concerns about the nursing care this patient has received. The words came out measured, professional, laced with the kind of gravitas that made younger physicians pause. Castellano's hand froze above Webb's chart. Pierce held up his tablet. The screen glowed with documentation, files stacked like kindling, each one labeled with dates and times and deviations from protocol. 3 weeks of meticulous observation translated into something that looked, on first glance, like incompetence. 17 documented protocol deviations. Independent clinical decisions made without attending oversight. Assessment patterns that concern me given her background. He didn't look at Ashley. That was the genius of it. He never looked at her. If we perform an emergent procedure based on an assessment from a nurse with documented competency issues, the liability exposure is catastrophic. We need to do this correctly. Full transfer to OR, complete surgical team, proper documentation. Castellano's face moved through several expressions, concern, defensiveness, then something that looked like resignation. His SATs are dropping, he said quietly. 73 now. Which is precisely why we need to follow proper protocol, Pierce replied. His voice was the voice of a man protecting his institution. His voice was the voice of a man protecting himself. Transfer to OR. Get the thoracic team. We document everything and we do this by the book. Castellano left. He didn't argue. He simply closed the chart and walked out, and Ashley watched him go with the kind of stillness that only soldiers understand, the stillness of someone whose hands are tied by rules written by people who have never held a life between their palms. The thoracic surgeon arrived at 0244. Dr. Reeves, grey-haired and competent, his movements carrying the efficiency of someone who had saved hundreds of lives. He took one look at Webb's monitor and then at the X-ray film against the light box. This needs to come out and go back in. Now. His voice carried no ambiguity. No hesitation. Just the clinical certainty of a man who understood the mathematics of oxygen deprivation. Pierce was already waiting in the hallway. He had been waiting. He had known this moment was coming, had prepared for it the way generals prepare for battles. His tablet was raised like a shield. His voice was reasonable, careful, the voice of a man concerned with patient safety and institutional protocol. Dr. Reeves, I understand your clinical assessment. But I've documented significant concerns about the reliability of the nursing assessment that prompted this intervention. Before we proceed with an emergent procedure. His oxygen saturation is 72%, Reeves said flatly. Which is why proper protocols matter more than ever, Pierce responded. If something goes wrong, and something does go wrong at this saturation, we need to prove that we followed every step correctly. Transfer to OR. Full team. Documentation. Reeves stood in the hallway for 5 seconds. 5 seconds that felt like an interrogation. Then he nodded once, sharply, like a soldier accepting orders he disagreed with. I'll call down to OR. Get the room prepped. By 0251, there were 6 physicians in room 12. The intensivist. The thoracic resident. The chief surgical resident. A cardiologist consulted for what-if scenarios. An anesthesiologist prepping for transfer. And somewhere in the background, like a puppeteer working the strings, Dr. Pierce, tablet in hand, speaking with each one quietly, methodically, building his case one physician at a time. The intensivist, a woman named Chen with the kind of calm that came from 20 years of critical care, suggested a temporizing measure. We could place a pigtail catheter while we're arranging OR transfer. Temporary decompression while. Pierce was already shaking his head. Policy for 47B, partial interventions by non-surgical staff create liability cascades. If it partially fails, we're liable. If it needs revision, we're liable. If it delays definitive care, we're liable. Full procedure, full team, full documentation. 7 doctors now. Then 8. The calls went out systematically to the on-call backup surgeons, to the night shift surgical team, to physicians who had clocked out hours ago and were already home, already in bed, already disconnected from the hospital's orbit. Each call was the same. Policy for 47B documentation concerns. Liability exposure. By the time they got the full surgical team assembled, by the time they had everything arranged perfectly according to protocol, the chain of command had become a chain of hesitation. 12 physicians had either examined Webb, reviewed his case, or been called in consultation, and 12 physicians had deferred to Pierce's invocation of policy and liability. 12. The number sat between Ashley and the patient like a wall. She stood at Webb's bedside at 0257, her hand resting on the side rail, her fingers touching the small embroidered patch sewn into the interior of her scrub jacket, the faded 75th Ranger Regiment insignia worn soft from 17 years of contact. Webb's oxygen saturation had dropped to 71%. His lungs were working overtime, his chest heaving with the desperate effort of a body starved of oxygen. His sister, Jennifer, sat in the corner with her face buried in her hands, asking anyone who would listen why no one was helping. Why was no one helping? Ashley could have answered her. The answer was standing in the hallway with a tablet and a voice like a tank idling in a garage, filing incident reports in real time, building a case that would end her career while a man she had carried through enemy fire for miles on her shoulders slowly suffocated in a room 12 feet away. Pierce moved past room 12's window, his face serene. He was winning. You could see it in the angle of his shoulders, in the way his fingers moved across his tablet screen, documenting each refusal, each physician's hesitation, each moment that proved his point. This was what victory looked like when you wielded policy as a weapon and authority as a shield. This was what it meant to break someone without ever raising your voice. Webb's monitor beeped. 70%. The sound was rhythmic now, almost musical in its tragedy. Almost like a countdown. The transport team was being called. OR was being prepped. The transfer would take 15 minutes. Maybe 20. In the time it took to wheel him downstairs, to position him under proper surgical lights, to assemble the full team and confirm that every form had been filled out correctly, his oxygen saturation would continue its descent. 68%. 65. 60. Ashley's jaw tightened. Her breathing remained steady. Her hand remained on the patch inside her jacket, that small piece of canvas that contained her entire history, compressed into faded embroidered letters and the weight of 18 years of decisions she could not speak about. 12 doctors had failed him. 12. Not because they were incompetent. Not because they didn't understand the geometry of the crisis. But because one man with institutional authority and a tablet full of documentation had convinced them that following protocol was more important than saving the life that was dying in front of them. The transport team knocked on the door at 0259. Time to move. Time to transfer. Time for the system to finally do what it should have done 22 minutes earlier, when Ashley first called, when the chest tube began to fail, when everyone should have understood that some emergencies don't have time for committees. Webb's sister stood, gathering her jacket. He's going to be okay now, right? Now that they're moving him. Ashley didn't answer. She was watching the oxygen saturation number, watching it fall like a stone into deeper water. 68%. Still dropping. Still time. But barely. Always barely. The next voice she heard would change everything. At 0303, the ventilator wheezed its mechanical rhythm like a drowning man gasping for breath that wouldn't come. Webb's oxygen saturation hit 68%. The pulse oximeter screamed. His lips turned the color of storm clouds, dusky purple at the edges, his fingernails fading to gray. Ashley stood at his bedside watching the numbers fall like a countdown to a funeral. 67, 66. The transport team hadn't arrived. Another critical patient, a multi-vehicle collision on IR-37, had pulled them away from St. Michael's 15 minutes ago. ETA now pushed to 22 minutes. Webb didn't have 22 minutes. He didn't have 10. In the doorway, Dr. Pierce stood with his tablet glowing in the darkness, his fingers moving across the screen with the delicate precision of someone playing a chess endgame. Each keystroke was a document. Each document was a death warrant. Real-time incident reports filed with timestamps. Witnessed by the 12 physicians now conferring in the hallway outside room 12, their voices carrying through the cracked door like a jury deliberating on a man's fate. 12 separate doctors. 12 separate refusals. Ashley had watched each one arrive, watched each one listen to Pierce's carefully measured explanations of policy for 47B, watched each one turn away with the quiet relief of someone who had been given institutional permission to do nothing. 65, 64. The silence in room 12 was so thick you could operate in it. Webb's sister sat rigid in the corner chair, her phone clutched in both hands, her eyes tracking the monitor numbers as if she could push them higher through sheer will. Her jaw was clenched so hard her temples pulsed. 18 hours ago she had been at a church service in Boerne, Texas. Now she was watching her brother suffocate while the system designed to save him filed paperwork instead. Ashley's hands moved before her mind finished the calculation. That was the training talking. The Kandahar muscle memory. The decision-making patterns burned into her nervous system by 3 years of field stations where the hospital was a tent and the only authorization you needed was the will to save a life before it got more permanent than it already was. She turned. Crossed the 4 steps to the crash cart. The metal was cold under her palms. The scalpel was in the instrument tray, sealed and waiting, a blade meant for sutures and minor procedures and definitely not for what she was about to do. She opened the seal. The steel caught the monitor light like a promise. 63, 62. Her hand steadied as a surgical laser. The muscle memory took over the way it always did when the world narrowed down to the next 3 minutes and what she could do with them. Intercostal space. Second rib. The anatomical landmarks were burned into her hands from practice representatives and real representatives, from dummies and from people bleeding out in the dust. The knife technique. The swift cut through skin and fascia. The replacement tube, 14-gauge angiocath, seated and secured in the cavity where oxygen could finally reach Webb's starving lungs. 90 seconds flat. Webb's SATS climbed like a pilot breaking through cloud cover. 72, 78. 85, the purple faded from his lips. His fingernails began their slow return to the color of living tissue. The ventilator's mechanical breathing found easier work. In the doorway, Dr. Pierce's smile was radiant with triumph. The smile of a man watching his endgame play out exactly as planned. He didn't step forward. Didn't interrupt. Simply stood there with his tablet and watched every second of what would come next. His typing never paused. The documentation continued. Every keystroke another nail. Everyone witnessed that, he said quietly to the physicians clustering in the hallway. His voice carried the weight of someone stating facts for the record. A registered nurse performed a surgical procedure without physician orders. Without supervision. In direct violation of her scope of practice. Policy for 47B, subsection D, paragraph 3. Ashley was already moving through the documentation like a soldier moving through muscle memory. Procedure notes. Timestamps. Intervention details. Her voice when she spoke was clinical, removed from the body in the bed and the sister in the corner and the man filing his case against her in the doorway. This was how soldiers documented their worst decisions, with precision and clarity and the kind of emotional distance that made the paperwork feel like it belonged to someone else. Webb's sister stared at Ashley with an expression caught between confusion and something that looked like awe. But Ashley's face showed nothing. The composure held. The mask stayed in place. Just a nurse doing what nurses do. Just a nurse following procedure and protocol and filling out forms in the middle of the night while her career burned down in slow motion. By 0700, the sun was pushing orange light through the east-facing windows and Dr. Pierce walked into the director of nursing's office carrying a stack of documentation 3 inches thick. The pages were bound with a paperclip he had carefully threaded through the corner. His presentation was methodical. He laid out each complaint like evidence, each incident report like a brick in a wall designed to seal her away from the profession forever. Timestamps. Policy citations. Page numbers. Witness statements from 12 physicians who had specifically declined to perform the procedure pending proper protocols. The documentation was irrefutable. The mathematics of it were undeniable. The director's face moved through the stages of resignation, and Ashley understood that this was the part where everything changed. This was the threshold. On the other side of the next sentence, her life would be irreversibly different. "Ashley, I need your badge and access card," the director said quietly. The badge was a small weight around her neck. A photograph taken 2 years ago when she had walked into St. Michael's for the first time in this identity, when she had been a completely different person wearing this face. The access card was magnetic and worn soft at the edges from 18 months of scanning into restricted areas, into medication rooms and supply closets and the places where classified work happens in the margins of civilian institutions. She placed both on the desk. She could not explain that she had been assigned to St. Michael's by Army intelligence. That Captain Marcus Webb's head injury 18 months ago had occurred during what the paperwork called a training accident, but which might have been something else entirely, something that touched classified matters and potential breaches of operational security. That her nursing license was completely real, but her presence at the hospital was something else, something that had a chain of command and oversight and an active case file in a Pentagon office. She could not explain that breaking cover meant abandoning an active counterintelligence mission 18 months in development. The words didn't exist that would bridge the gap between the life she was living and the life she was supposed to be protecting. By 1100 hours, she stood alone in the hospital laundry. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like something dying by degrees. Her scrubs were folded into neat stacks with perfect hospital corners, the creases sharp enough to cut yourself on. The muscle memory of a soldier making even surrender look disciplined. Each uniform bundled with the precision of someone who had packed field packs for 3 continents. Each stack placed on the return shelf with the finality of something that wouldn't be reclaimed. The faded 75th Ranger Regiment patch came free from the inside of her jacket lining. The fabric was soft from years of her palm pressing against it in moments of crisis and doubt, when she needed to remember who she actually was underneath the scrubs. She slipped it into her pocket and let her fingers rest against it for a moment. The texture of the past. The weight of what she had left behind. Then she walked out of the hospital. The parking lot was already warming in the San Antonio sun. No one called her back. No one stopped her at the doors. The system had ejected her cleanly, just as it was designed to do. She didn't know yet that in 40 minutes, the director of nursing would run the standard exit paperwork background check and her computer screen would flash red with security warnings that would make her hands shake. She didn't know that Webb was already waking up, already whispering a call sign that would unlock everything. She didn't know that a Pentagon liaison officer was already in the air, that a 2-star general was already informed, that the machinery of national security was already turning toward St. Michael's with the force of something that couldn't be stopped. For now, there was only the parking lot and the heat and the small patch of fabric in her pocket that still carried the smell of desert sand and the memory of 19 lives saved in the dust. The next voice she heard would change everything. By noon, Ashley Cooper stood in the hospital laundry room folding her scrubs into a neat stack with hospital corners, the muscle memory of a soldier making even surrender look disciplined. The fabric still carried the faint antiseptic smell of St. Michael's mixed with something else, the copper scent of Webb's blood that no amount of washing could fully remove. She placed each folded layer with precision, the same care she'd once used packing a rucksack for a 30-mile patrol through Kandahar. Her security badge sat on the folding table beside her, the magnetic strip already deactivated by the director of nursing's own hands at 11:30 that morning. No tremor. No hesitation. Just the quiet acknowledgement of a mission that had ended badly, though not the way anyone outside this hospital could possibly understand. The director had been professional about the termination. That was the cruelest part. Not anger. Not righteousness. Just the institutional machinery grinding forward, each form filled out correctly, each box checked, each regulation cited. Dr. Pierce's 3-inch stack of documentation sat in a file now, a paper monument to a man who didn't understand that some violations were architecture built on necessity. Ashley had folded her hands during the meeting and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The truth lived in a classified briefing somewhere, locked behind security clearances and need-to-know compartmentalization. She had been assigned to St. Michael's by Army Intelligence 18 months ago to monitor Captain Marcus Webb for signs of operational compromise, a foreign intelligence agency attempting to recruit an injured ranger with incomplete memory and no witnesses. Her nursing license was legitimate. Her skills were real. Her purpose was something else entirely. By 14:30 that afternoon, the background check results flashed red across the director's screen. Security clearance, top secret SCI, compartmented access authorized. Immediate Pentagon notification flagged. The director stared at the words. Then stared again. The other administrators in the conference room, hospital counsel, HR director, the chief medical officer, all fell silent. One of them leaned forward. "What am I looking at?" The director's fingers trembled slightly as she scrolled. "This nurse's security clearance. She has a top-secret security clearance with special intelligence access." "That's—" She didn't finish. They all understood what that meant. Before questions could be asked, before anyone could speak, before the director could even process what the implications were, the floor supervisor's radio crackled with a code they'd never heard before. Bed 12. Patient requesting his nurse. Patient states Valkyrie 6. Repeat, patient states Valkyrie 6. That's the protocol activation. This is real. The words hung in the air like a detonation. Valkyrie 6. Not a patient condition. Not a medication name. An operational code name. Captain Webb's eyes had opened for the first time since the emergency, his pupils tracking, his voice clear despite 3 weeks of sedation. He had spoken that name to the floor supervisor with the precision of a soldier activating a pre-arranged signal. It was the protocol. It was the confirmation. It was everything Ashley had been waiting 18 months to hear. The doors to the hospital burst open at 15:32. Not ceremonially. Not with warning. A 2-star general from Fort Sam Houston walked through the entrance in dress uniform, his uniform decorated with ribbons that told stories of 3 decades of command, and his boots, polished to a mirror shine, made a sound like a rifle shot against the tile with each step. Behind him came 2 officers in dress blues, their credentials hanging from lanyards, their posture the kind that comes from standing watch over things the civilian world isn't allowed to know existed. The general moved through the hallway with the kind of presence that made the air pressure change around him. Nurses stopped. Physicians stepped back. This was not the kind of authority that was negotiated or questioned. Dr. Pierce was still in the director's office shouting about fraudulent credentials, about conspiracy, about protocols and standards when the general's aide interrupted him mid-sentence with 2 words. "Step outside." It wasn't a request. It was a command. The general's salute, rendered in the general's own presence, was the sharpest anyone in St. Michael's had ever witnessed. The kind of salute that carried 18 months of classified recognition, the kind of salute that was both a greeting and a closing statement on everything that mattered. Dr. Pierce's face drained of color. He tried to speak. The general raised one hand. "Your services are no longer required in this conversation, Doctor." Rodriguez appeared in the director's office at 1600 with a hard drive the size of a deck of cards. The IT specialist was a Marine Corps veteran, his combat action ribbon visible in the photos scattered across his cubicle next to images of his 2 kids and a rescue dog. He set the drive on the conference table with the care of a man handling classified evidence. Dr. Pierce requested deletion of the hallway security footage from 0200 to 0400 this morning, Rodriguez said. His voice carried the flat authority of someone who had seen worse than hospital politics. "Hospital policy requires me to report any deletion requests during active incidents. I didn't delete it. I copied it instead." The room watched the footage on the conference room monitor. 12 separate timestamps. 12 separate doctors. The pattern was unmistakable. Each physician approached Webb's room, examined his monitor, O2 sat dropping towards 68%, and left within minutes of speaking with Dr. Pierce. In one frame, Pierce's tablet was visible. In another, his finger pointing at text on the screen. In a third, a physician shaking his head, saying something that the audio system couldn't quite capture, then walking away. The silence in the conference room was the kind that comes from watching the architecture of malice become visible. Rodriguez waited. He also coordinated this before the emergency developed. The emails are here. Server backup preserved them. By 1800, 3 of the 12 doctors had provided sworn statements. Each said the same thing. Pierce had told them the chest tube issue was stable. Nursing was overreacting. There was no emergency. One of them, Dr. Carver, an attending thoracic surgeon with 30 years of service, broke down during his statement. He told me she was panicking. That she didn't understand the protocol. I trusted him. I didn't go check. My patient's oxygen saturation was 68% and I didn't go check. Webb's sister had recorded her own statement. Pierce had told her the delays were normal surgical caution. Standard procedure. Nothing to worry about. All the while, her brother's lips had turned the color of old bruises. The state medical board suspended Dr. Pierce's license pending criminal investigation for patient endangerment at $2,100. Hospital administration announced his immediate termination at 21:30. His office was cleaned out by security by 0300 the next morning. No escort. No ceremony. Just the quiet removal of someone who had suddenly become a liability instead of a credential. 2 days later, surveillance footage obtained by the Federal Bureau of Investigation showed Dr. Pierce in the hospital server room at 0900 for hours before the background check triggered, while Ashley was still folding her scrubs in the laundry. He was attempting to access her personnel file. The timestamp proved premeditation. He had known something was coming and had tried to delete evidence. His attorney eventually advised him to stop speaking to federal investigators, but Pierce, unable to accept that the nurse he had targeted held authority beyond his comprehension, kept insisting he was protecting standards. Each protest provided more evidence of malicious intent. Each explanation dug the hole deeper. 6 months later, Ashley stood in Webb's private hospital room wearing her Army uniform, captain's bars gleaming on her shoulders in the afternoon light that came through the windows. The classified mission had concluded successfully. The foreign intelligence attempt at recruitment had failed when Webb's injuries prevented the scheduled contact. Ashley's 18-month surveillance had confirmed no operational compromise had occurred. The assignment was complete. The cover was blown. The purpose was vindicated. Through the window she could see the loading dock below. Dr. Pierce, wearing a supply company uniform with a faded logo on the chest, loaded boxes of bandages and 4 supplies into a medical transport van. His physician career was over. His medical license remained suspended with criminal charges pending. The only healthcare work he could find was inventory management. $18 per hour. No benefits. No pension. Just the quiet degradation of someone who had mistaken position for power. Webb traced the letters of her name on his forearm, his fingers gentle on the ink that had aged to dark blue-black in the months since Kandahar. "I got this the day after you carried me out," he said, his voice still rough from the sedation. "I told the tattoo artist I needed to remember the person who wouldn't stop." His memory had returned in fragments over the past months, pieces surfacing like a recovery operation, until the full picture of Kandahar had reassembled itself. The firefight. The evacuation order. Her hands on his shoulders dragging him toward the perimeter. For miles. Under fire. 1 nurse. 1 ranger. 12 doctors who later chose protocol over mercy. But one person who understood that sometimes the only rule that mattered was the one written into your bones. She reached up and touched the ranger patch, now framed on his wall beside his Purple Heart. The 75th Ranger Regiment insignia, still carrying the faint smell of desert sand, still whispering stories of a war that would never fully end. The quietest person in the room might be holding it all together, she said. It wasn't a revelation. It was a statement of fact. The kind that some people learn too late to matter, and others never learn at all. Below, in the loading dock, Rodriguez watched from the IT office window, a cup of coffee raised in silent salute toward Ashley's distant silhouette. That was the real power. Not titles. Not credentials. Just the quiet people who knew what needed to be done and did it anyway, carrying their scars like tattoos under their uniforms, waiting for the moment when the truth could finally be spoken aloud. The story doesn't end here. Captain Ashley Cooper's classified mission is documented in full in her upcoming memoir, Valkyrie 6, releasing next spring. If you want to follow more stories of the quiet warriors walking among us, subscribe to this channel, like this video, and comment below. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your true value?